really didn't do that. The scaling expert, you know, they're kind of screwed now. You gotta have to make these things with those five ingredients. You know, and it's a session after session. Yeah, you will line up all of that.
Looks like the pizza arrived. If anybody's hungry and wants to grab a quick piece. Nice. Well done. How are you? No, I did not. More ways I've lost my God. Oh, good. Yeah. There you go.
Who's going to seal first?
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, good. Good timing, huh? Go ahead.
Yeah, I picked the two. Oh, you want to start?
Yeah, I am. I live here. How about you? Okay. So are you yeah.
Right.
Yeah, nothing so fresh.
We're knocking down the windows.
No, I'm not sure. I thought about it.
This is artisan off the end of chicken.
No, mine found it. I'm in finance. I worked in. Yeah, that's the thing. That's recently I joined the University of Texas down there. So, this is a great place to work. I'm getting happy to work all the time. How many people on your team? Just you? Yeah.
He's got a slide through. Thank you.
Just energy. That building. I worked for an oil company for a while. I worked in what kinds of people work for corporate now? I'm at SVP. Yeah. We manage $40 million down.
Your session.
No, but I'm not involved. Probably about half. Yeah. Okay.
Are you? You're going there. I'm going to this one. And we'll meet up at 1:30.
I'm not personally involved.
Hopefully get somebody later.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to From Seed to Series A, fundraising topic. By chance, is anyone from Janik Vinnacota in the audience? They're a local law firm that is the sponsor for the fundraising track. So the pizza that you're enjoying right now or enjoy, we can thank Janik Vinnacota for that. They're a specialized law firm that's experienced in IP and patent litigation, and they also do a lot of startup and technology business formation law. So if you're looking for advice and counsel and need some help from an attorney in some of those areas, Janik Vinnacota is someone to give a look at. My name's Gordon Doherty. I'm a managing director and general partner here at Capital Factory. I run the Startup Accelerator as managing director, and I'm a general partner in our venture fund. I'm also an angel investor. I'm a pretty active publisher of startup advice articles and a producer of a video library called Founders Academy that you can find on my Shockwave Innovations website. You see my Twitter handle there, and the hashtag for Austin Startup Week this week is ASW17. So if I accidentally say anything insightful and you want to give a shout out on social media, hashtag ASW17, and there's my Twitter handle, and of course @Capital Factory is the Capital Factory Twitter handle. What we've got here in this topic from seed to Series A is a discussion about the evolution of fundraising over multiple rounds. Some of you might be fortunate and you raise money once and then you're off to the races and you build a great company that exits for $1 billion at some point in the future. But most of you will need multiple rounds of funding, from a pre-seed to a seed stage and then on to Series A. There's a lot of differences that you will experience as you go from that seed stage on to Series A. So I want to kind of take you on that journey so you can anticipate how that might go, and specifically some of the most common issues that I encounter. We'll first talk about some very basic fundraising vocabulary so that we're level set. We'll talk about how to figure out how much money you should raise and when to raise that money. And then we'll move into issues, hints, and tips. It probably will leave us 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes for questions. The questions are a little bit best to leave for the end. If there's something burning, don't hesitate to interrupt me during the lecture. But to the extent it's not a burning issue, maybe just capture it, write it down, or type it into your phone, and then I'll try and leave 20 to 30 minutes at the end for open Q&A. Fair enough? First, as a disclaimer, I have to let you know I am not a licensed attorney and I'm not a certified public accountant. So what you will hear in this presentation are reflections from what I'll describe myself as a layman, someone that has raised money from both private and venture capital, and someone that has advised a lot of startups on doing the same. Okay, so you'll get that perspective. The reason I mention that is the things that we're going to discuss here, capitalizing your company, bringing funding into the company, giving equity to investors as a result of that fundraising activity is such a critical event. You're carrying a very sharp knife, and I don't want you to accidentally cut yourself and just take action only based on some PowerPoint slides I'm going to give you. You want your accountant and your attorney to be advising you along the way. Okay? So let's start with some fundraising terms. You hear about valuation. And valuation is simply the implied value of your company. I happen to have my house on the market right now because I've recently moved, so my house that I previously lived in is on the market. I think I know what it's worth, and therefore that's the number that I had it listed in the MLS app, but it's really only worth what someone else is willing to go under contract and go across the finish line and go to closing with me. At that moment, I know what my house is really worth, okay? Before that, it's speculation. And of course, I have methods. I'm comparing myself to other houses in my neighborhood, so there's a way that we go about valuing things. And actually, in fundraising, there's two different valuations. We have pre-money valuation, and that's the implied value of your company before you receive the funding. Then you raise that money, you can add that on top, and the sum of those two equals the post-money valuation. This is really important because if you're talking to an investor and they're thinking post and you're thinking pre, you can have a mismatch. And you're thinking you're giving up a certain amount of equity, but they're thinking a different amount of equity. So I always want to make that clear. When I'm sitting with an investor and we're talking about valuation, I'll literally use the words pre. We usually, as founders, we're usually negotiating the pre-money valuation. So I'll say, $4 million on a pre-money basis, or $4 million pre-money. Okay. You'll hear us talk about priced rounds or equity rounds of funding. This is when you sell equity in your venture. In other words, the investment gets them a certain amount of equity in your company. I say this because there are certain forms of fundraising that don't involve giving up equity. You might do a crowdfunding deal in which you're pre-selling your product. You might do a revenue-based funding in which you're essentially giving royalties or dividends. If you think of bald-headed Kevin on the Shark Tank, he loves doing those royalty kind of deals, right? He's not getting equity in the company oftentimes when he does that. and you might raise money on a convertible note or some convertible security that looks like debt, and it converts into equity later. But if we say we're raising a priced round or we're raising an equity round of funding, it means we're exchanging cash for equity right there in that transaction. As we do an equity round of funding, we often create another class of shares. When we first incorporate as a C corporation, probably in Delaware, we have a common class of share. The founders get common shares. But usually when we sell equity in the company to professional investors, VCs and experienced angels or angel networks, they want a different class of shares that have different rights. We call those preferred shares, and that's because they have preferential rights. They have rights, some of the common rights that they have are rights to their money back first. In other words, they stand in line. If you sell the company kind of in distress or for a number that's less than the investment that you raised, the investors get their money back first before you and the other employees and advisors take some money off the table. They probably have special voting rights. They might get a board seat. They have pro rata rights, which means the ability to chase their investment over time so that they don't get diluted. They have to invest more money at the new terms, but they have some right to hold their equity percentage. Things like this. It's this list of special rights that would differentiate the preferred shares from the common shares. Okay? Now, there's a lot more I could go into in terms of basic vocabulary and mechanics. We don't have near enough time, so what I'm going to highly recommend is you get this book called Venture Deals. It will be your go-to guide. You want to read it carefully. You want to dog-ear it as you go through and highlight sections that are meaningful, and then put it on a shelf where it's only 3 to 5 feet away from grabbing. So wherever your home office is or your place of work, you want this to be handy. Mine is, and I promise you I pull it off the shelf at least once a month. And I've been around the block and done a lot of things related to fundraising, but I find that I still need to pull it as a reference. I promise I don't get commissions if you buy Venture Deals, so this isn't about me making money. It's about me hopefully keeping you out of trouble. Okay? All right, so that's the basics of some vocabulary. Now let's go into how do you figure out how much money you should raise. It's actually as much art as science, but I want to give you some tools to figuring that out. At a basic level, it's what I describe as the Goldilocks syndrome. If you raise too much, then you might experience excessive dilution for you and your co-founders and other stakeholders in the company. If you raise too little, then you don't have enough money to reach interesting milestones in which to go raise money again. So you're trying to find that just right. This bed's too hard, this bed's too soft, this bed is just right. You know, the Goldilocks story. So that's what we're looking for. What is just right? I'm going to give you a tool to try and figure that out. It's actually, in its basic sense, very simple, but then you're going to see nothing is that simple in running a startup, so it's going to get complicated here in a minute. But let's start with the simple approach. The amount of money you raise from investors affords you a combination of time and resources, and with time and resources, you can accomplish stuff. You can achieve various outcomes, right? The more time and more resources, the more outcomes. And time and resources are in competition with each other. The more resources you choose to hire with the money you raise, the less time you're going to have. So you're going to be combining these dimensions of time and resources in order to accomplish outcomes. Simple, right? Oftentimes, if you tell me you're raising $500,000, don't be surprised if one of the first questions I have for you is, why is $500,000 the right amount of money? Okay? And I often hear what I feel are bad answers to that question. I'll hear answers like, it's the most we think we'll be able to raise, it gives us enough money to hire a certain number of people, we only get diluted 25%, or it allows us to operate for a certain amount of time. Okay? Very, very common answers. And actually, all four of those things might be true. $500,000 might be the most you can raise unless you hire 3 devs and let you operate for 9 months and might only dilute you 25%. So it's not that those answers are inaccurate, those answers are inappropriate. Why is that? That's because my response back to you is going to be, so what? Why do I care about any of those things? I'm an investor, I'm going to write you a $500,000 check. Why do I care that allows you to operate for a certain amount of time or allows you to hire people? That's not why I write checks. I don't write checks for those reasons. You might go, oh, but hang on, Gordon, $500,000 will allow us to get our first 100 paying customers and introduce a second version of our product that we can sell for 3 times the amount of money, which means we get CAC payback in 4 months instead of a year and a half or whatever, right? So you might answer the so what question with something like this. And that's when I shake your hand and say, much, much better. I'm not giving you the money yet, we have a lot to talk about, but that's the kind of response I'm looking for. This is because investors write checks for outcomes, not activities. As a founder, it's hard for you to not think about the activities and only the activities. You're thinking about, God, if I can just get my hands on $500,000, I can finally start doing some marketing and I can hire some people and even I can join the company full time and we can get a little office and. Your focus is on what we call the use of proceeds, how you're going to spend the money. I want you to first think about and communicate what you're going to accomplish with the money. Okay? And really good things to accomplish are acquiring customers and opening markets and landing strategic partnerships, right? Things that advance the business and things that actually show a more exciting company at that point in the future. A company with more employees isn't necessarily a more exciting company. A company that lasts another year isn't necessarily a more exciting company. But a company that had 0 paying customers and now has 100. A company that was a marketplace only doing business in Austin and now it's doing business in the 4 major cities, metropolitan areas around Texas. That's a more exciting company. So tell them about the more exciting company that you're going to build with the money. Okay? Now, if you present a set of outcomes and I say, I don't believe you, how are you going to accomplish that? Well, that's when you bring out your list of activities. The list of activities is how you're going to accomplish the outcomes that you claim. Okay? So the way to do this, actually, this exercise is don't start with the amount of money. That's crazy. You don't say $500,000. What could I do with $500,000? Well, I could hire these people and it's going to last this long. What could I accomplish with that? No, work your way backwards. Look into the crystal ball and imagine yourself at some indeterminate point in time in the future. Don't pick an exact time frame, but imagine a more exciting story than you have to tell today. Imagine some customers, an advancement of the product, and a partnership, distribution channel. I don't know what it is, but like, what is that imaginary future company of yours? What does it look like, and what might you put in that outcomes list? That would seem, that would seem reasonably exciting. If I accomplished that versus where I am today, I think those future investors that I'm going to pitch, not the ones today, but the future ones, would give me credit for those accomplishments, and I can then raise money again at a considerably stepped up valuation. That's how this game works. Since it's unlikely that you'll be able to fully capitalize the company into a sustainable company off of 1 round of funding, the way this works is raising money at this valuation today, running on the hamster wheel with time and resources, accomplishing things. It's a more exciting story. So then we raise money in the future at this valuation. We run on the hamster wheel and do it again, and then we raise money at this valuation. And eventually that part of the game stops, and we're self-sustaining, and we're just executing through the IPO. So it's a subjective statement that you need to accomplish enough outcomes to have a story that gives you a significantly or considerably stepped up valuation in the future. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Sorry to inject one question. Is this for seed money or Series A or both?
Yes. All. This part of the fundamental premise continues until you're done fundraising. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So those are the outcomes. What about the time and resources? This is the most dangerous part of this concept for me to kind of give you parameters, because I told you focus on the outcomes. Then you're going to back into what combination of time and resources do you need to accomplish that, and then you're going to put a price tag on that, right? We're going to work from the right to the left. But I do want to give you just some general rules of thumb, just so you'll know if you would be considered an outlier. So for a seed stage of funding, so there's this thing called a pre-seed round, which might be the thing that you do in conjunction with friends and family, or a little bit after that. The pre-seed round is probably before you have paying customers, right? You're developing your minimum viable product, but you need a little bit of money to get there. So I don't have the time frame on that because those vary, all over the place. But when we get to a seed round of funding, if we call it a seed round, usually you've either just launched your product or you're just about to launch it, like you're really right there. You might have a few paying customers, but not a lot of paying customers, okay? Not very many dots to connect. So in that seed stage, we often raise enough money to last about a year or so. And part of this is how much time do you need in order to accomplish things? So you could go hire 15 people, that doesn't mean they're immediately productive, right? So I would say a year's time would be common, give or take a few months would be typical for a seed round. Whereas for a Series A, it might be 18 months to 2 years, give or take, would be kind of a common amount of time for a Series A to last. Don't use that as your excuse to raise that amount of money to last that long, but I'm just saying if as you back solve into time and resources, you're fitting in these parameters, I don't think investors are going to ask you questions. Whereas if you're raising enough money to last, if you're raising a seed round enough to last for 2 or 2.5 years, the investor will be like, wow, why are you raising that much? Like, really, 2 years? Aren't you going to accomplish some interesting things between now and then? You're going to dilute yourself a lot. On the flip side, if you raised a Series A only enough to last for 9 months, you're like, wow, really? That just doesn't seem right. As soon as you finish raising, you're going to be back on the fundraising trail again. So those are some of the reasons why I'm giving you some guidelines. Okay? So now we have outcomes, time and resources. We put a price tag on that. Everything's beautiful. It's all perfect. Okay? Except there's this check and balance. Now we got to go test that with investors to see how much credit they're going to give us for this current story and this current plan to go accomplish these outcomes. That's where the valuation comes in. And we might have been thinking about a valuation here, but as we've met with 30 investors, we can tell they're thinking more like here. So this is our check and balance. You might still do the deal at the lower valuation and just give up more equity, or you might go back and do that exercise again. Wow, I wasn't thinking it was going to be 2 million valuation. I was thinking 4. Yikes, we're going to dilute a lot. And I don't want you to be excessively focused on dilution, but you don't want to give up 60% of the company in the very first round of funding either. So that might cause you to scratch your head and say, okay, I need to bring out the crystal ball again. That was a little too overzealous. Let me dial that back a little bit. The outcomes aren't quite as exciting, hopefully still exciting enough that in the future you can get credit for it, but you might moderate. And as you moderate those outcomes by looking in the crystal ball again, your time and resources are going to shrink. Either time, resources, or both. That puts a lower price tag on it. Okay, now maybe that lower price tag combined with the valuation they'll give you, assuming the valuation doesn't change again, now the dilution might be acceptable. So that's the first iteration you're probably going to go through. But how does the valuation get set? Well, it gets set really based on the state of your business is what I describe it. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later when I compare and contrast seed to Series A's and what are some of the mechanics that go into the state of the business. It's obviously very different. The state of your business and the things that you can talk about and describe are very different during the pre-seed and seed stage versus the Series A. But let's just say it's this combination of accomplishments and projections and maturity of your business and the team and things like that. So that's how this works. The state of your business influences the valuation. The relationship of valuation and amount raised determines the dilution, and hopefully that amount raised allows you to accomplish some pretty interesting outcomes. Okay? With me so far? Okay. Now, I spoke as if your valuation just kind of starts increasing. And the truth is, even if your business results, let's say you've got paying customers and you are growing revenue exactly 10.000% every month over month, okay? Just never happens, but let's just pretend. even in that scenario, it is unlikely that your implied valuation over that time would also go up in a straight line. That's not quite the way it works. Yes, increasing revenue means your valuation should probably go up, but there are usually other things that happen in your business that cause these spikes, these bumps in valuation. And it could be a variety of things. I'll give you a couple examples in just a minute, but just if you'll stick with me for a second, why would we only raise enough money to get to this point just before this bump? That'd be nuts, because a month later, we're gonna get this bump up. I would wanna raise enough money back here to get safely past that expected bump in valuation. Or maybe I jump past 2 of these, depending on what the time horizon is. I realize you have to look in the crystal ball and imagine what would be those bumps in valuation. So let me kind of tell you more about what I'm talking about. I'm talking about proving things, i.e. validating them, accomplishing things, or de-risking something. To the investor, it's all about risk-reward. And in the earliest days, you're just an idea on a piece of paper and a person, right? But as you prove things, as you go from that, when you start off in the coffee shop, you and a co-founder, your business actually is a list of 85 assumptions. We believe this, and we believe that, and we think that if this, then that. And if you really wrote all of those out, what your company equals a list of 85 assumptions. So your mission in life actually is to kind of prioritize the ones that demonstrate viability, desirability, feasibility, and you try and check those off first, because the investors give you credit for that. And so things like bringing on a badass co-founder, not you and your college buddy that are just fresh out of college 9 months ago, but someone with 18 years of experience with an exit in your space. Bing! Your revenue results didn't change. It grew 10% month over month last month, and it's going to grow 10% this month, and it's going to grow 10% next month. But you're sitting with an investor, all of a sudden when you reveal that, bing, valuation just popped up. That strategic partnership that you got signed with Facebook, or somebody in your industry that can give you some significant lift, even if it's not producing revenue, maybe even if it's just a letter of intent that's signed by a vice president and they legitimately want to do business with you, boom, bump in valuation. Same 10% month over month growth. So when you look in your crystal ball and you think about driving valuation, think about those things too, and raise enough money to get past that hiring of that badass co-founder, or to get past securing that business development relationship, okay? Past that patent filing or that patent award or these kind of things, okay? One of the articles that comes to mind that I wrote is titled Defending Valuation, or Justifying Your Valuation Before Revenue Traction, or something like that. If you type the words valuation or traction on my homepage, on my Shockwave Innovations homepage, you'll see an article where I've got about 28 different ideas for boosting valuation that don't have to do with generating revenue, okay? So now let's stack these together. We raise a pre-seed round, we raise a certain amount of money, it afforded us time and resources to accomplish stuff. Then we go out in the future and we get a valuation step up and we do it again for a seed round. We accomplish things based on that seed round of funding, and we get a step up in valuation, and we do it again for a Series A. And this movie continues playing, like I said, until we're sustainable and don't need to raise money anymore, okay? That's the way you should be thinking about it. As we do this, general rule of thumb, and there's a lot of exceptions, but generally you're going to get diluted 25 to 35% with each of these rounds. Right? Step up in valuation, but you raise money, so you're going to experience some dilution. If that's the case, then through the Series A, it's hopefully likely, that the common shareholders as a class of shares have majority control of the company, and that would be great. It's not disaster if and when the investors or the preferred shareholders have majority control. That's going to happen almost certainly through a Series B. Sometimes it happens through the Series A, but that is one kind of marker that I commonly look at. When me and the common shareholders have majority control, then we're calling the shots on most of the important stuff. When that balance flips, if there's tension between us and the board, or us and the investors, then, you know, that's when things can happen where the CEO might get ousted from her job, or things like that. Okay? Yeah.
Not to overly confuse, but there's a lot of talk about convertible notes that are usually between a seed and a Series A. Do you consider them more a second seed or testing the waters for a Series A?
Yeah, thanks. So during the seed round, convertible notes are very common. So where does that kind of play in all this? So first off, it is a round of funding that does not bring the dilution right away. So if we raise a $500,000 seed round on convertible notes or its cousin, the SAFE, which is a convertible security, this dilution is baked in. We just don't feel it right away. It's a delayed dilution because it looks like debt. It looks like I owe them back. But instead of paying those investors back principal and interest, that convertible note, the value of that converts into equity with the Series A or with a preferred round or an equity round of funding. So because of this, it can happen that if I raise a sizable chunk in a seed round and then I raise a traditional Series A, you know, you might come running back to me and say, Gordon, you lied to me. You told me it was going to be like 30% dilution with each round of funding, but my Series A, I got diluted 50%. And I'm going to go, no. Your seed round diluted you 25 to 35%. It's just you didn't feel the pain. The pain of that was combined with the pain of dilution in the Series A, so you got hit with it all at the same time. Right? That's why a lot of times the Series A looks like it's 40 or 50% dilution. Really, that was 2 rounds of dilution that all hit at once. If you're not familiar with convertible note mechanics, unfortunately I don't have time to cover that in here. I do have some articles on it. I've got videos on convertible notes. It's very important that you understand how they work. You can accidentally cut yourself with a sharp knife if you don't understand the terms, but they can be a very valuable funding instrument. And during the open Q&A, if you guys want to geek out a little bit on convertible notes or something, I'm happy to talk about it. How much is typical? Again, dangerous, but I like to give you general rules of thumb, and I'm talking in Texas. We're not in Silicon Valley with these numbers, but we're Texas, and actually probably most of the rest of the country would look kind of like this. A small seed round, you know, let's say a pre-seed might be $150,000, $250,000. A more true seed round as you're launching the product or you just launched it and you have a few customers, $500,000 to $1 million would be common. $1.5 million seed round in Texas would be considered on the large side. And then when we get to Series A's, those are in the $3 to $6 million commonly for Texas startups. Variations, if you're doing a hardware startup, these rules are different. You have to raise more money and earlier. If you're doing a consumer land grab because you're building the next Snapchat and gaining 100 customers a month ain't going to do it. You need to be gaining hundreds of thousands and getting to millions. Okay, land grabs, you raise more money sooner. Okay. It almost always takes longer than you expect. You might be one of the 1 out of 50, 1 out of 100 lucky ones that gets some buzz and boop, 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 wasn't that hard? I closed my $500,000 seed round in 30 days. If you're the other 49 out of 50 or 99 out of 100, it's going to take months. 3 months, 4 months, could take you 6 months. Some startups seemingly are perpetually fundraising. But that might be your reality. Like things don't work out like you think. So that causes the fundraising can take longer than you think. And I'll give you some hints on that a little bit later in the last part. Things also don't play out like you planned. So we had this vision, we looked in the crystal ball and felt like this combination of 1 year and these resources are going to accomplish these things. Well, guess what? Shit happens. And it doesn't happen the way you think it happens. And you're going to pivot once, maybe twice. And one of those pivots might be significant. Oops, everything changed. So as you look at that crystal ball and decide how much to raise, you might want to bump that up and cover for some of these contingencies. Okay? That's how much you raise. Let's go find some investors. Seed round, those are angels, angel syndicates, angel networks. They dominate the seed round. Yes, many accelerators come with guaranteed funding and things like that, so there are other sources. And the Series A, B, C, those are from venture funds. Okay. Every VC is different, so as we move and start thinking about raising a Series A from a VC, the main advice I have for you is know the kind of investments they make. If they're not investing in companies that are like yours, and like yours means stage, round size, the funding size of your funding round, industry, technology area, then I'd be inclined not to waste their time or yours. They advertise this, it's right on their website, so they make it easy for you to figure out what kind of investments they make, and they show you their portfolio of companies. Okay? One thing I like to do with VCs is to get to know them early. So we're talking, this section is finding and pitching investors. You hate it when your pitch to a VC for the first time is when you've got an active Series A open. That does happen, and you will meet with some like that, but man, how much better it is if they can have a relationship with you over time. So 6 months before you think you're really going to be fundraising your Series A, you want to be meeting with those VCs. And you really actually want to say, we're not ready for you yet, we just want to build a relationship so that we can get to know each other. And the VCs, they'll drop their guard, they do this all the time. That way they get a snapshot in time, and they can watch you. And you're going to make some projections and commitments, and you're going to tell them the fancy things that you're going to do. And 2 months later, then 2 months after that, and if you actually execute on what you told them you were going to do, you really get some good brownie points and credibility with them. And you're not expecting them to go from 0 to a decision in 1 or 2 meetings. Okay? So now let me tell you a little bit about the fundraising chasm. It's a recent article that I published that I find, unfortunately, a lot of startups fall into this chasm of hell. But let me tell you why it happens and how you can try and avoid it. So in your pre-seed round, you are simply a combination of a team and what I call hope, vision, promise, and potential. You haven't accomplished anything. There's no product that I can poke on and touch and play with. There's certainly no customers I can talk to. So you're a team, and we'll size up the team on their skills and their experience and their drive and their passion. And then you're a collection of hope, vision, promise, and potential, and hopefully your ability to convey that. When we move to the seed round, well, now you probably have a minimum viable product, so now I can at least touch and play with something, and at least you probably have a business plan. You've had some time to develop your theories on how you're going to acquire customers, what your customer acquisition cost is going to be, and kind of what the next year might look like. Okay, so what we've added, you're still team and some hope, vision, promise, and potential, but you've augmented a minimum viable product and a business plan. Then we're going to jump over to the Series A at some point in the future. The team carries forward. The team is always important, and you're probably adding to the team. Hopefully you added a badass or two onto the team by the time you raise the Series A. But the hope, vision, and promise, and potential, now that's kind of behind us, because now you have a track record, and I can see your traction. I can see your traction actually trended over time. I can connect those dots into something that resembles a curve, and that curve either looks like that or it looks like that. And those are very different curves. So I can see curves, trends, I can see your projections, I can test you on your knowledge of your operating model and your financial model. I can get a sense for the maturity of your business. I'm going to ask you questions about your management system and how do you go about making decisions. What's the culture of the company now? Right? When you're a guy, a girl, and a dog, there is no culture. It's a project. But by the time you get to a Series A, there should be a developing culture. So this Series A company is a different company. And the investors are sizing you up on those things. Because of this, that creates this chasm in the middle. I'll see startups that will raise enough money to get the product launched and to get their first, 20 paying customers or whatever, but not enough dots to connect to put into those nice curves and not enough maturity on the operating model to really know what my customer acquisition cost is. Not much of a management system, really. We're still running around like chickens with our heads cut off, and you're kind of in this in-between. Oops, who wants to invest in that? You're kind of in this weird, funky adolescent stage. You're not a little kid, but you're not an adult either. Okay, you're in this funky, weird stage. That's what I call the fundraising chasm. So how do you get around that? Well, if you could predict that, and now hopefully just arming you with some information, you don't want to raise a seed round just enough to go get your first 10 paying customers when maybe what you need is 100 to be exciting to the VC. So you could raise a larger seed round, okay, enough to get over that chasm. Now, it assumes that you can see this ahead of time, it assumes that you're good at looking into the crystal ball, and it assumes that there's enough investor demand to raise $700,000 instead of $500,000. And that might not be your case. So I realize I'm sitting here saying, well, just raise a larger seed round and get over the chasm. You might say, Gordon, I had to scratch and claw just to get to $500,000. But this is the other reason why you might hear, if there's more money on the table, take it. Like if you're raising $500,000 and there's 600,000 or 650 of demand, the difference in dilution for that extra 100 or 150 is going to be minuscule compared to the effect that 100 or 150K might have to overcome a pivot or to get across that chasm. Okay? We might have to bridge the gap. So if we couldn't see it ahead of time and accommodate for it, it's there. You might have to bridge that gap. And we call them bridge rounds. Many of you will end up having to do a bridge round. It's not disaster when it happens. It just means I don't get much of a step up in valuation really, and I have to raise more money. Often we'll do it on a convertible note. It's usually a short time horizon because I'm just raising enough to get across that chasm and be attractive to the Series A investors. Okay? Your existing investors are probably the most likely candidates. They already know you. So to go out and try and find new investors for a bridge round is kind of this funky thing, like, I don't know, this is kind of bridge round, it's kind of scary. What if it doesn't work? What if they fall into the chasm anyway? So your existing investors are often the best candidates. And you might find a VC that wants to get a nibble. They want to get a little nibble at the apple. They like what you're working on. You've been meeting with them. They're not going to lead some big round, but if they can get a little bit of money in at a lower valuation and then leave the Series A, you might find some VCs that will do that. The final idea I have is to get creative with some non-dilutive funding sources. They may or may not be there, but maybe there's some grants that you can apply for. Maybe you've got some enterprise customers that would do a prepayment, or maybe you're licensing your technology and you can get a customer to prepay for that. Or you might, instead of a convertible note or some other form of convertible security, you might go take on some venture debt or look at traditional debt. Okay? Non-dilutive. Okay? Everybody understand the fundraising chasm? Have a pole vaulting pole that's big enough to get over that thing. So let's step through what I see as the most common issues that you're going to face and some hints and tips that I have to combat them. First is going to be valuation. It's going to drive you nuts, always arguing over valuation. I already mentioned you're only worth what investors will agree to, so part of this is you have to be able to tell the story. You have to be able to tell an exciting story. You are a salesperson. I don't care if you're the technical founder and you've never done a sales call. If you're raising money, you are selling the company, right? You're selling your vision. So for those of you that aren't comfortable with that, I really recommend you go through some sales training workshops and you go through some presentation workshops and how do you communicate a vision? How do you come across as passionate and exciting? For some of you, it's going to be very uncomfortable, so you better get uncomfortable with some coaches, some mentors, some advisors, some instructors. But the way valuations get set are kind of 2 or 3 different key ways. One, and the most common, is comparables. What do other startups like you in a similar stage with similar success and similar attributes as you, what valuation are they raising money at? It's exactly the same as listing my house. What I do, I had my agent pull some comparables in my neighborhood for homes that are roughly my size, built in roughly the same time range, you know, with a backyard pool and with this or just whatever the key features are. And I'm looking to see what are they listed at, what are they listed at, what are they listed at, and more importantly, who closed on a sale of a home. And I'm using that to influence what my home is worth. The exact same for you.
How do
You
you
want to look around what other startups are out there that are into a funding round and having some success, or have raised money, closed a round, and they look kind of like you. Your business model and or amount of traction and things like this. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if it's sort of a new market play that if there are not a lot of comparables in that market, do they sort of try to look at adjacent markets to figure that out?
So if what you're working on is kind of so innovative that there's not really many comparables in that way, what do you look at? When I say comparables, it's less about artificial intelligence startups or a particular thing. It's more, has a working product, launched it, has very early customers, and has a team of founders that have 3 to 8 years of business experience, not fresh out of college, for example. Like, it can be just those kinds of attributes. It's not as detailed as you might be thinking. It's not necessarily in your technology area, okay, or things like that. It's more the kind of these other business attributes, more related to team and traction. And so because of this, I can tell you that here in Austin, if you've got a shipping product and some early paying customers, but less than $10,000 monthly recurring revenue, and the team isn't maybe it isn't serial entrepreneurs with big exits, it's just kind of normal entrepreneurs, maybe first timers or whatever, I'm going to tell you if you're raising money on a convertible note, it's probably got a $3 million valuation cap. Why am I saying that? Just because 19 out of 20 of the term sheets that I saw for convertible notes for those kinds of companies had a $3 million valuation cap. If you're earlier than that, meaning you haven't launched, then probably it's less than the $3 million valuation cap. Maybe it's 2. If you got more than $10,000 monthly recurring revenue, or one of the members of the team is a serial entrepreneur with an exit or 2 under her belt, okay, it's probably more than 3 million. It's 4. It's 4.5. So I'm just giving really kind of broad off the top of my head, but that's how the investors do it. We see so many deals that when you sit down and that last slide comes up with your fundraising terms, boom, I'm pattern matching, running through my head the 28 deals that I've seen in the last 3 weeks, and does that kind of fit in that range? To deviate from that, you'd need some competition. You've got this VC and that VC and that VC that all want to lead the round. When you have competition, the price goes up. No competition, the investor is going to call the shots. You also have this interesting dynamic in which some VCs have a target equity requirement. Some of the local VCs here, even in town, have a 20% target. And if that combination of the amount they're going to invest and the valuation that you're asking for only gets them 14%, it's a deal killer. Now, if you're at 18%, maybe that's close enough. They often don't want to go above a certain percent, right? So as crazy as it sounds, you might play around with the valuation to get them in their target equity. Now, the easy answer is, well, instead of investing $1.5 million, just put $2 million and you'll get your equity. But they might not want to put that much money at risk in your venture. Okay? So these are the 3 ways that 3 things you can use for debating valuation. You're going to have this dilemma about running the company versus fundraising. Fundraising is a total time suck. It will take, if you're successful fundraising, 80% of your time or more, even 90% or 100%, unless it's okay with you that it takes 5 or 6 months. If it's okay that it takes 5 or 6 months, then you can dial it in at like a 40% of your job kind of thing. Usually we want to get the fundraising over so we can get back to running the company. So this is a big dilemma. If you're a solo founder, I don't know what to tell you. You want to advance the business. If you've got some co-founders or some others that can roll on your oar in addition to their oar, wear your hats while they're wearing theirs too, of course the business is not going to advance as fast as it was when you weren't fundraising. I just find if you try and dial it in at 30 to 50%, it's going to be extremely frustrating. Traction trumps everything. If you've got traction, it's really hard to argue. Investors can say, hate your idea, nobody wants that, no, you got that customer acquisition model is not going to work, and you go, here's our traction, we've got 85 customers that are paying this, our customer acquisition cost is such and such, and we get a payback in 6 months, boom. How do they argue with that? They can still say they think the idea sucks, but like, traction is the hardest thing to argue with. So if you have it, you're going to flaunt it. If you don't have it, everything else you're going to be doing is hand waving. Look over here. Don't look at my traction. Look over here. Look at this co-founder over here. Look at this advisor that I got. Look at this whatever. Look at how pretty the UI is. And all those equal no traction, no traction, no traction. So get creative. If you're pre-revenue, get creative on traction. Revenue traction is the best traction, but there are 28 other types of traction. What is traction? Traction is evidence that the world is experiencing the problem that you're solving and is willing to pay to have that problem solved. Okay? People want it and are willing to pay for it. That's what traction evidence is. So come up with other forms of evidencing traction. The way these funding rounds go is there's a momentum to it. It's not a calculated 1 investor a week until you get the round closed. It doesn't go like that. And the hardest part is the initial momentum. The hardest part is getting that first domino to topple. After the first domino, it's easier for the second and the third, and after now you've got 8 dominoes or 10 dominoes, boom, the rest are definitely easier. That first one is the hardest, okay? Some of you have heard me tell this story or this analogy, but I liken it to the dance floor at a wedding. You have a nice, beautiful wedding. Now you're at the reception, and the DJ is playing great music. But you're 6 songs in, and nobody's on the dance floor, right? Of course, the bride and her father dance and all that. But then after that, DJ's playing great music. Nobody's dancing. Finally, your Aunt Sally and Uncle Bob get drunk enough to get on the dance floor, and 18 other couples immediately jump on the dance floor. Isn't it true? Get one couple on the dance floor, boom, everybody's on there now. So your mission is to get an investor on the dance floor. So you have to get them drunk, get them on the dance floor.
So then you take a smallest check up front and be like, hey, look, we got $30,000, even though we're looking for, 1.5 million. Is that smart? Is it
That's
stupid?
right. Yeah, so how do you do this? I'm going to give you 3 or 4 different ideas for getting that first investor or investors. It's not like one of them necessarily unlocks the whole rest of the round, but the first check written, I have it here, maybe it's obvious, but is the riskiest. If you're raising $500,000 and I write you the first $25,000 check, there's a risk that no other investors open their checkbook. And now I'm dead. As an investor, you needed $500,000, you got $25,000, you're going to die very quickly. And my investment just went to 0. So really what I want to say is, hey, I like your idea. Come back to me when you're at $475,000 and I'll give you the last $25,000. Why? Because that's the least risky investment. I know your bank account has money. You have an opportunity to pivot. You have opportunity to make all kinds of mistakes. So I want to be the last check written. But if everybody's the last check, you're dead. Yeah.
On that note, what do you suggest we carrot out to get that first check?
That's what I'm going to talk about next. So first is to size up the investor for first check concerns. Okay? If I say, let's meet again, give me some more information, I need a little more time, I'm kind of on pause right now, in between whatevers, those all might be true, but I might be really saying, I ain't paying your first check. Come back to me a little bit later. No investor wants to actually say that. Love the opportunity, but I'm not going to invest first. Okay? They don't like saying that. So the way these work is they kind of go into this, you find after a few weeks you get a couple investors to write their checks. I want to come back to it in just a second. And then there's this interesting phenomenon when you get to about 2/3 of the total round closed, like if you're raising $500,000, once you get to about 300,000, your narrative should change. You don't say we're raising $500,000 and leave it at that. You say we're raising $500,000 and we only have $200,000 left. Can I reserve a slot for you? You're messaging it as this scarcity now, okay? And the way we're going to get there, one of the tools we're going to use for the first checks written is to leverage verbal commitments, verbal commits. Since I ain't actually writing you the check, I might be willing to tell you I'm committed. And based on my commitment, you go get other commitments, and then we have a check writing party. So I want to invest. I'm not opening my checkbook. I might even tell you, like, hey, no. You need to get some other investors first. Okay, Gordon, can I consider you verbally committed then? Like, you're committed to this investment. I just hear that you don't want to be the first check written. Is that right? That's correct. Awesome. Well, what will it take to get you to open your checkbook and write that check? Is essentially what you're going to ask. Oh, well, is there a certain amount of money? Like, if I go get another investor for $25,000, would you feel comfortable? No. Like, if you can get to $100,000, $150,000, I'd feel comfortable. Okay, so if I get to $100,000, I can come back to you and you'd be willing to invest at that time. Yes, that's correct. Okay, great. Is there anything else you need in order to open up your checkbook and write that check? Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, now that you mention it, I'd like you to bring on a co-founder because I don't invest in solo founder deals. It's important to that other part because if you think all you have to do is go get to 100,000, you go get to 100,000, you bring it back, and I'm still not writing the check. So I got $100,000. Anything else? Okay. Now you got the checklist, and you're doing this with multiple verbally committed investors. Okay. Realize there are different shades of verbal commitments. Gordon, can I mention your name to other investors? Because if I tell them I have an existing investor committed, that's not as good as me saying, hey, Gordon Doherty's committed to invest in this round. Okay? Gordon says yes. So you might say, and do you mind if I mention that you've committed to $25,000? Because that'll make it really seem real, right? Gordon, do you mind if you and I exchange an email after this meeting? Because there's going to be some investors that are really skeptical when I say, hey, Gordon's already agreed to invest $25,000. He just wants a couple other investors in the boat first. They're going to go, yeah, bullshit. And I'd like to, Gordon, be able to open up my email and say, no, look, here's the email exchange, recapping the meeting we had 2 days ago. Okay? Gordon, would you be willing to take a reference call from an investor that even with the email doesn't believe that? Would you be willing to take a call? So these are ideas to make the verbal commitment of increasing credibility. Okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to cobble together these verbal commitments, and when I've got $100,000 of them, we're going to have a virtual check writing party. I'm going to notify everybody, hey, I've got $100,000 committed. I'm going to send out the docs for execution, and if you need, I'll be happy to show you the signature pages, for the other investors, so that then you're comfortable, writing your check. That's kind of how I do it. In your mind, what you're thinking is, if you could get them all together for coffee so they can each see each other and bring their checkbook, you'd have a check writing party. So you're doing the equivalent of a check writing party. Yes?
Real quick, do you have to concern yourself with, let's say, investors who are wanting to negotiate that contract? Because everyone's going to want maybe some slightly different terms, and you're wanting to have this party to have everybody write a check, but they're like, well, I may not like exactly all the terms in the agreement.
Yeah, what about the terms? So the terms need to be the same. At least for when investors invest in the same time frame, they, for the most part, should get identical terms. You might deviate from that for a particular reason. One investor might be more strategic or whatnot. My recommendation in that is actually to still have the same terms, flip them some advisor equity if you need to, or flip them, some other form of equity if you need to juice their economics. As much as possible, you want investors in the same round to get the same terms. Now, since you mentioned that, I don't remember if I have it here, but I'll mention this now. One of the ways you can get the first investors on the dance floor is to give them preferential terms versus the future investors. Hey, I'm raising $500,000 on a convertible note with a $3 million valuation cap. But for our first $100,000 of investors, I'm offering a $2.5 million valuation cap or a $2 million valuation cap. You're recognizing their investment is more risky than the last $400,000, so give them an economic reward. And you can come right out and say that. And so then that becomes a nice inflection point. Once you get verbal commitments for that amount, boom, you get those invested and you move on. Next issue, investor ADD. They see a lot of deals, at least active investors do. So even though they high-five you at the end of the meeting, that excitement wears off pretty quickly. You stay excited for a while because you think you got that investor committed, but their commitment starts waning. So you need excuses to get back in front of them, and the best excuse is traction. You're going to make promises, you're going to foretell what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen next month. Those are great excuses to get back in front of them. So if they aren't opening their checkbook, you need to evaluate these kinds of things. What is it? Not enough traction? How much traction would you like to see? Not the right team? What's wrong with the team? Don't like these funding terms? What is it? Is it the valuation? Is it the, what? It might just be that you're not good at closing an investor because you weren't ever professionally trained in sales. And closing an investor has similar attributes as closing a deal. Another reason why you might want to get some coaching on selling techniques. Asking the right questions, soft closes. If and when they don't invest, you want to know why. Gordon, I realize you're a no. What is it that you need to see in order for this to be an exciting investment opportunity for you? That's not a yes or no question. Now I've kind of got to tell you something, and whatever I tell you becomes something that you can not debate necessarily, but go work on. And if you hear the same kind of thing over and over, okay, now you really know it's that. If I tell you that, look, the reason I'm not going to invest is you and your teammates are absolute bozos, you're uncoachable, and I do not work with founders like you, okay? Don't ask me the second question. Do you know of any other investors like this? That second question is actually for if I say, look, seems interesting, my whole career was B2B enterprise software and hardware. I don't know anything about consumer mobile apps. I don't even know what questions to ask you, so it's just not my thing. Well, that's a perfect opportunity to ask the second question. Oh, totally get it. Do you know any investors that do like to invest in consumer mobile apps? Okay? Don't spend that money till it's in the bank. I know you're raising $500,000 and you're excited about the $100,000. Spend to the $100,000. Imagine that's all the money you're going to raise. So as you start raising money, it's okay to start spending. Just don't spend to your fundraising goal. Spend to your amount of money raised. I see this too often. And especially if there's kind of a little bit of momentum, like, oh, hey, just been raising for 30 days, we're already at 250,000 on our 500,000. So they start spending to the 500,000, and then, oh, they hit a wall and can only get to 300 or 350. Oh, shit. I've already hired the people, I've already done this, I've already done that. Like, there's certain types of spending that you can't just dial down. You can dial your marketing agency down, right, and other service firms, but you hired those engineers, now what are you going to do? Do a layoff? Do a layoff? Oops. Layoffs smell like, you know, dead company coming, you know. It doesn't look good, so be careful. Realize that when you're calling on VCs, there's a pecking order. So you want to get to a general manager or a general partner or a managing director, because they're the ones that make the funding decisions, even oftentimes as a committee, with one general partner as your sponsor, and there's a team of 2 or 3 or however many, and there's this voting process. It's unlikely that you'll be able to have a first meeting with a GP or a managing director, which means you got to work your way up the ladder. It's easier to get an introduction to an associate or a principal than it is a general partner. But you also don't want to spin your wheels and meet with venture associates or principals at venture funds for too many meetings, because they're not making the decision. If you've had a 4th and 5th meeting with an analyst, associate, or principal, you're not making progress. And there's a reason. There's a reason why, and you need to find out why. Why aren't they bringing a partner or a general partner in the discussion? And you need to kind of ask that question. Hey, Gordon, 4th time we've met. You know, happy to go through your process. At what point in your process would one of your partners or general partners get involved? What does it take to have a meeting with one of them? Yeah. Or you can ask, Gordon, we've met 2 or 3 times now. If this thing moves forward, which general partner of yours do you think would be the sponsor for a deal like this? Oh, you know, Jill so-and-so would be the general. Great. And at what point is it appropriate or okay if I meet with Jill? You're trying to get access to power. Okay? Now, this is where introductions really help. If I make an introduction of you into a VC, I'm not likely going to introduce you over to an analyst or an associate. I'll probably introduce you to my counterpart. I'll introduce you to a GP or managing director. Doesn't mean you'll get a meeting with them, but that's where the introduction starts. And then they say, okay, hey, great, sounds interesting. Meet with Joe, our associate. That's fine. I mean, now you've gotten that introduction here. So an introduction from someone, you know, like me that runs in the industry can help accelerate access back to that GP. Okay. Kind of final big comment here is I recommend that you optimize for growth, not dilution. As founders, we tend to be obsessed with minuscule amounts of dilution, and we're just trying to do everything we possibly can to hold on to as much equity as possible. Our mission in life is not to hold on to as much equity as possible. Our mission in life is to build and grow a badass company that has a huge exit. Because when that happens, everything else works just fine. My 6% equity in $1 billion exit is a hell of a lot more interesting than holding on through, you know, rounds and getting, you know, maniacally focused on dilution. And I exited with 32% in a $10 million exit. Okay, it's still life changing. I understand it's still money, but no, I want 6% in $1 billion exit. So optimize for growth. If you're faced with venture fund A, B, and C, and they dilute you 25%, 25.2%, and 26%, those are close enough to me. Even if I said 27, 28% on the other one, which one is going to help you grow a great company? Which one is going to put their weight behind you? Which one has had successes in your area? Much more important than a difference of a point or 2 of dilution. Okay? We're going to open up for questions here. I've got a lot of material on my blog. My fundraising category has the most articles, more than 30 articles there in that category. And then I have a video library titled Founders Academy. I've got 2 versions of the video library. You can find information about it on my Shockwave Innovations website. There's a page called Videos. The full video set has 42 modules. The essential set has 15 modules, so there's some choices there. And then I run a quarterly boot camp here at Capital Factory called Founders Academy Essentials. It's the sign behind me. I just finished one last week, so the next one will be the week of January the 15th, I think. But the Eventbrite's already up. If you're a Capital Factory member, it's free. If you're from the general public, it's only $99. It's a week-long lunch and learn, so we meet for an hour and a half every day over the lunch hour. I typically have 90 to 100, 110 registrants, including virtual participants. So I'd love you guys to join me for the next one. The Eventbrite is already up, foundersacademy.eventbrite.com for that January session. Okay? So now you're armed and dangerous. Curious what questions you have. Yes, sir.
Hey, so we're doing our seed right now, and we're, signing $200,000, which just closed yesterday, that we
Congrats.
signed on the 2nd.
Congrats.
And I've been surprised that most of the interest that we've gotten is through capital groups, not big VC firms, but capital groups. And I keep hearing about going to the angel networks, and then I look at C10, they want $250 when you walk into the door, and all this other stuff that, I'm a little cheap because I'm a founder and I don't want to spend $250 for
Sure.
something that's just going to go in a circular file.
Okay.
So I guess the question is, how do you get in front of the right people to start making a lot of those smaller deals? Because I think that's the best way for us to be able to close this round.
And when you said, I'll recap this question in just a second, but when you said capital groups, what do you mean?
Oh, so they're capital investment firms, like a venture, but they do seed rounds and they do small dollar rounds. They usually have some kind of, we're in kind of a niche industry. A lot of these guys have some kind of social good or academic thing that they're looking for.
Got it.
So yeah.
Okay. So the question was kind of this trade-off of pitching angel groups or angel networks. Sometimes those involve an upfront fee, and it's a process, right? It doesn't just, it's not a one meeting decision, versus perhaps maybe a venture fund that is a seed fund, okay, a seed capital fund. And there are those. When you see venture funds, most of them are Series A and later, but there are some that will invest in seed rounds for sure. And so, how should you think about that? How do you get started? The first thing I think about is getting the terms established. So what you want is kind of what you consider a lead investor to debate you for the terms, and hopefully an acceptable set of terms, because that kind of sets the anchor, and you use that then to proceed through the rest of the round, and you point to the fact that the terms are hopefully set, hopefully they'll stay. Now, you convince a first investor to some crazy high terms, and you come to me, just because you convince them to invest in those terms doesn't mean that's the terms of your round. It only represents the terms of your round if you can continue to close the round. But one of the reasons why your approach might be good, raised from a seed venture capital fund or something that resembles that, they are professional investors, they know what they're doing, so if you negotiated those terms with them, then it's definitely going to carry some credibility. Number two, the lead investor almost never takes the whole round. They might do a nice chunk. In your case, I think you said a couple $100,000. But remember, once they invest, they want you to raise the rest of the money. If you don't, they are at risk now. They're at more risk. So they are actually helping you raise the rest of the round. In the case of angels, if your first few investors are experienced angels, then you could consider that collection of those first angels as your lead investor. And then the comment on the angel networks, we are fortunate here in Texas in that two of the most active angel networks in the whole country are C10, Central Texas Angel Networks here in Austin, and HAN, Houston Angel Networks in Houston. They're always in the top 3 to 5 most active in the country. They each run at least 4 cycles. I know C10 runs 5 cycles per year. So there's almost always a cycle to jump into. And yes, in some cases there's a fee or there's some other requirements to get into it. We do tend to be stingy as founders, right? Because every couple $100, I could spend that on some Facebook advertising, or I could do some paid search, or there's things I can do with $200 and $500. So you'll have to make a decision. One comment I would make about pitching to the angel networks is, I know you're trying to go all the way through to the final round and get a syndicate of however many investors to put $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in. But it is also true that advancing just a round or two in their process likely exposes you to enough individual angels that they can peel off and make an investment. And you're also creating a little bit of hype, a little bit of buzz. It's a large community, so having your name come up in conversations around town and around the state can be extremely helpful. It gives this feeling of buzz. So I can't push you to spend the 250. There are ways of going through the early parts of their process to kind of get a sense, or you get a good vibe, like you think you might have some success. That might help you decide on spending the money. There are also angel networks, Baylor Angel Network, San Antonio Angel Network, Cowtown Angels. There's lots of angel networks, and many of them don't charge money. So one approach you might have is to go to one of those others, see how you do, take your pitch out for a test drive. Hey, what if you could convince the Baylor Angel Network to put in $150,000? Now you come back to the Central Texas Angel Network, you can easily afford the $250, and you got the credibility of saying, oh, the Baylor Angel Network, invested this much. So those are a couple thoughts I have on that. Yes, sir.
Is there much usage of escrow account to mitigate that risk for the first checks? Let's say you're raising $1 million, and you say I won't break escrow until I hit 500,000.
Yep. What about for the first check written syndrome to use an escrow account? Yep, Gordon, I get it. Don't write your check to me. Write it to XYZ escrow. It'll sit there. Now you could do that. I never see this done. I don't quite know why, but I'm imagining there'll be a little bit of administration and maybe some legal costs in setting that up. The terms of release of the escrow is what's going to get reviewed. But if you've got an attorney buddy that won't charge you anything or won't charge you much, and you have a vehicle for doing that, I think it's not a bad idea to try. Yeah, because that would be even better, right? Because if I say I'm verbally committed, something could happen. Hey, sorry, I thought my house was going to sell, but it didn't sell, and so now I don't want. I was under contract when I gave you the commitment to sell my house, but shit, now it hasn't, and I'm kind of nervous. So that verbal commitment can go away. But if I write the check and it goes to escrow, that's good money. Back.
Do venture capitalists ask about or have expectations related to the entrepreneur's financial commitment to the enterprise? For example, is it expected that by the seed round, the entrepreneur will have invested his entire liquid net worth?
Okay. Yeah, when you get to VCs, the question is, do they have expectations that the founder or founders have put money into the venture? And if so, is there a certain amount that they'd be expecting? No, I don't think so. Not in most cases. If you've had a significant exit, if you made $1 million or more on a prior venture, then yeah, there's probably some expectation that you bootstrapped. You got the minimum viable product developed on your own capital, or maybe you shared it. You shared the risk. You put some capital in, and some others did too. Most of you don't fit that category. If you haven't already set up your retirement and or your kids' college fund and or don't yet own a home, I don't think most VCs expect that you're putting significant amounts of money into the venture. The way you bootstrap instead is you do nights and weekends on this venture for a little while, or you tap your family network for friends and family or something like that. But no, I don't think there is an expectation that the founders have directly injected a certain amount of money into the venture, unless you've had a moderate success in the past. And there might be a psychological assumption that you had. Good question. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Have you found that angels would be willing to invest outside their state? So would Texas networks be willing to invest in a company that's either surrounding or even as far as the East Coast right now?
Good question. What about angel investors? Do they invest local, or would they be willing to invest outside their geographic area? So would Texas Angels invest in non-Texas companies, for example? It's actually at the pre-seed and seed stage a little bit more local than that. Like Austin startups in pre-seed and seed round are going to raise from Austin Angels for the most part. Now, San Antonio's just down the road. Angel networks and those that are more active, I think Austin happens to have a light shining on it, and angels in Dallas and Houston, for example, are aware of the support structure that's here, and they might be comforted with that. But an Austin angel has so much opportunity to invest in Austin seed stage startups. Why take the risk on a Houston or Dallas startup unless it's really right in their strike zone? This is partly because many angels, I'd even say a majority of angels, aren't just pure financial investors. They're doing this partly because they want to give back, and and also partly because they want to get attached to some interesting, innovative, early stage craziness, you know, and so they want to be able to meet with you. So even though you're not bringing them onto your advisory board with equity, they want to feel like they're also advising the company. That's part of the extra value you get from their money. It's money and some help. And that's why in the pre-seed and seed stage it is hyper-local, and the exceptions usually are exceptions where your business and their strike zone for investments, meaning what they've done in the past, things they've been successful at, actually happen to be a really good match. When we get to VCs, it loosens up a little bit. I'd say the Austin VCs will invest in Austin companies, but would also invest in Texas companies if it meets their thesis. But they're going to be a lot less likely to drift outside of Texas. I'm talking about Series A. Series A VCs invest not hyper-local, but fairly local. In Texas, that means Texas. It's when we get to the Series B that it starts to loosen up. We don't have any Series B investors in Austin. What I mean is we don't have headquarters of venture funds here that write $10 and $15 million checks. So we jump on airplanes when we're ready for the Series B. We're going elsewhere for that money. Good question. Yes?
What about borrowing against purchase orders like pre-seed? So like we're trying to raise for seed right now, but we have a shit ton of purchase orders,
Yep.
but we're less than a year old.
Yep.
Who would you suggest talking to for borrowing against purchase orders?
What about borrowing against purchase orders? It is a form of collateral. If you're maybe selling an enterprise, or you have a physical product, or it doesn't really matter necessarily, there are institutions, those will be more traditional funding institutions. Think kind of banks or more like banks. VCs, no, not that. Unlikely angel, would do that. So you're talking to more traditional bankers, including venture banks like Silicon Valley Bank, in that category of bank, might give you enough credit, or treat that as collateral. Yeah. Or a combination of that, and maybe this is where it's going to be dangerous, but if you have to put a personal guarantee with, put your name behind collateralizing that, it'd be a little scarier, but yeah, you might be able to get credit for that. What else? Yeah.
Is there a reason why we would not take a full round from a single investor, either at the seed or A stage?
Is there any reason not to take to close a particular round from a single investor? So you're raising $500,000 a seed round, and there's a high net worth individual that'll take the whole thing, or a $4 million Series A, and there's a VC that wants the whole thing. Is there any reason not to do that? Not necessarily. It's not that bad things will happen. It can actually be a very good thing, because you're not herding cats. I was an executive at NetQOS, an IT management software company here in town. We raised 3 rounds of funding, total of about $15 or $16 million from a single investor. A single New York investor funded 3 rounds, $15 or $16 million. What was awesome about that, board of directors, we didn't have investors fighting each other, and believe me, it happens. When you have multiple, when you get to a 5-person board and multiple VCs sitting on the board, they don't always agree. And so it's one thing for you arguing with a board member, but when board members are arguing amongst themselves, it's harder. Authorizations you have to go get, and things like that. In our case, it was fabulous. We grew the company to $57 million in revenue and sold it for $200 million to a Fortune 500. And as that happened, we had one investor we had to talk to. Hey, thinking about hitting the eject at $200 million. What do you think? And they said, "You guys ready to, put a close on this chapter?" We said, "Yeah, we think that's reasonable." They go, "Okay, let's sell the company." We didn't have to chase down 18 investors. It's very unlikely the scenario that we're describing is going to happen to you, but it's not that bad things are going to happen. Causes additional scrutiny. I think I want to do diligence on the investor more in that case, because I'm not kind of spread out, with multiple. So I really want to get to know that angel or that VC. But I think that's best practice anyway. I think you want to know who you're taking money from. In the back.
From your experience, can you talk about how many startups are hardware versus software that get funded?
First off, so the hardware versus software, I think about 1 out of 20 startups that I see are hardware startups, have some physical hardware product. Almost all hardware startups are also software startups. Most of you, when you develop hardware, there's a real software application, whether it's a mobile app or or web app that goes with it. In other words, I'm not just talking about the firmware that's running inside, you know, the piece of hardware. I'm talking about more user-presented software. So that gives you extra burdens because it's already risky as a software company, and there's certain things that go into that, but now you add on all the other stuff with hardware. About 2/3 of my career has been in hardware startups, so I understand it and have plenty of scars in my back from it, but have built some great companies, you know, too. The thing is, so I'd say it's 1 out of 20 or so startups are doing something hardware, maybe even just 1 out of 30. A lot of that is because it's just so easy and inexpensive to write a few thousand lines of code, including stitching together a bunch of open source and put it out there and see if the world even wants it, right? We didn't spend a lot of time, we didn't spend a lot of money, and we got to determine if there's any desirability in the market. Hardware, unfortunately, we can't do that. There's almost not a concept of a minimum viable product in hardware. There's like a real version 1. In software, we do kind of this crappy thing and just throw it up there and see if anybody wants it. In hardware, that's harder to do. And the amounts of money that we need to raise are more significant early on. So I do find it more challenging for hardware startups to raise their early rounds. Part of this is the mentality of angels and early venture funds, even, let's say. I already told you it's 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30. So all of the others are kind of these scrappy companies that don't need much, and God, you mean with just $250,000 you can get kind of a version 1 and we can see if the world really wants this? Versus the hardware's like, oh, you mean for $2 million I can see if the world wants this? So a lot of the angels will just go for what's perceived as the less risky approach. I think for hardware companies, you need to find angels and funds that have invested in other hardware companies and or grew up in hardware. Because what they'll understand is the defensible value you have. When you're in hardware, you more likely have patentable something, and you also have a more difficult path to getting a product in the market, which essentially translates to a guy, a girl, and a dog fresh out of college aren't going to go do that because that's freaking crazy. Why would I go through all of that just to get a product? You know, so I think you have less competition and you have more defensibility if it works out. And a subset of investors understand that and will give you credit for that. Okay? Time for about 2 more questions. Good questions, though. What else is on your mind? Yes, sir.
So with the myriad of options that are out there, debt, you get an SBA-backed loan for up to $5 million, qualified, convertible debt, equity, revenue-based financing, crowdfunding. I mean, are any of these pools more interesting? ICOs, there was a meeting just a little while ago about conducting one of those, and that just seems to be the Wild West of fundraising.
Yeah. So the various forms of funding, more in the seed round from the examples that you listed, but we can use traditional debt, convertible debt, we can do crowdfunding, pre-sales, we can do actually equity crowdfunding. Now we're allowed to take money from non-accredited investors using a certain type of crowdfunding portal, revenue-based funding. You know, are any of those better than another? The one that I would comment on that could be better than the others would be traditional crowdfunding. So Indiegogo, Kickstarter type campaign, and that's for 2 reasons. One, it's non-dilutive funding, so as founders we like that, but even more importantly, it's validating. When you come tell me that you opened up a Kickstarter and you sold 5,000 of these things and raised $222,000, I can't really kick your ass and say, nobody wants this thing. Are you kidding me? You're not solving a problem that the world cares about. You go, sold 3,000 of these before even having the product. Like, people gave me money before I even delivered the product. There's almost no more validation, no higher validation than that. So in that way, I could say but not all types of products are good for crowdfunding, for sure, for pre-sales. And some of you will make the mistake of thinking if we post it, they will come. And that ain't the way those things work. I mean, it is real effort, real strategy, real marketing to have a successful crowdfunding campaign. I'm not an expert on it. I've never done it. I've never sat on the board or been a close advisor to a company that did one. Of course, plenty of the startups in the accelerator that I help run have done that. So I've watched it. So I can't tell you, what are the ingredients to success, but I do know there's numerous articles and books and advisors exactly on that. But outside of that, if you go the traditional debt route, the one thing I would beg you is, don't put your life savings up as collateral. What you're working on, it's risky, but you are mentally less capable of facing the odds and acknowledging the odds of it not working at all. Like nobody gets any money and you have to close it down. Those odds are extremely high. And if you allowed yourself to really face that and absorb it, you might not continue with the venture. That's why we don't do that. But that's why I say, if you're going to sign your personal name on a piece of paper where the $85,000 401k account that you have, you're using as collateral for this, please don't do that. You need that 401k. Now, if you happen to have $85,000 sitting in a slush fund and you're willing to lose it, then sign the personal guarantee. So that would be one I'm nervous about, kind of traditional debt. Hitting up angels, they lose money all the time on these deals. No, it's the way it works. I'm just going to give you a personal story. I have 14 investments that I've made over the last, I think, 6 years or something. 5 of them have already gone to zero in those 6 years. Okay? I'm not freaking out. You know why? I know 3 more of them are going to go to zero in the next 2 or 3 years. And all I have to do is have one of them that gives me a 20x return on my invested capital, and 1 or 2 where I get my money back, or maybe a 2x or 3x, everything works just fine. So I went into it knowing, the reason I made 14 investments is I know half of them are going to zero. So, if I invest in your company and it goes to zero, as long as you weren't a bozo and just did really, really stupid things, we can still grab coffee. I'm a big boy, I'm gonna write it off, I'm gonna take a tax benefit as a result of it, right? And so I'd rather you waste my money than waste your personal savings account. Okay? In the back.
So you mentioned companies like Snapchat and all those that have network effects, right? So when building companies like that, how do you raise funds from investors who maybe, of course, it's more risky than normal companies, but also if you see Snapchat and companies like that, they have money before they launch. So in terms of, hey, you don't have traction, but they got funding, how do you combat that when you're talking to investors saying, hey, I need to see revenues, but oh wait, the companies that are in the same space didn't have any revenues, but they got the funding?
If you're working on the next Snapchat and it is a land grab kind of venture or opportunity, which means you got to go get a lot of users before you either get to revenue or you get to any interesting kind of revenue, meaning it's about acquiring users. That is going to be extremely hard for you to get funded in Texas. I'm just going to be honest with you. What you read in articles is true. Like, we don't have enough successes like that here for us as an investing community to feel comfortable with that. That's why so many of those are getting funded in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, they pour a lot of gas on that early fire, and it means a lot of those are going to crash and burn. A lot of them. It's not that they have a higher success rate, it's just a lot of venture capital gets flushed down the toilet out there. And so if you have the next Snapchat, you might try and get the very initial funding here just to get the product built or get some crappy MVP or something. And then actually, you might want to go see if you can't get invited into Y Combinator or one of the Silicon Valley accelerators, get a light shine on you. You might have to go to a place like that where there are a lot more investors comfortable investing in the next Snapchat. But then I want you to go have $1 billion exit, come back to Austin, and help spawn the next. It's not quite as bad as I said, but I just want you to be realistic. Like, if that's what you have to do to be successful, give it a run here. Don't beat your head against the wall for a year.
You have time for one more?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah, okay. So you see a lot of different software companies that are doing the beta thing where they're putting it out there and they're giving it away for free without getting any sort of monetization. Does that actually have any interest to investors? Does that show actual traction to them? Is that useful?
Is beta traction? The answer is yes. However, an expected $1.99 mobile app that has thousands of kind of free trial customers isn't near as validating as a $100,000 enterprise product, and you've convinced one large enterprise to actually put it in the data center and try it. So part of this is how much convincing is required for your prospect to agree to take on the beta or the free trial, okay? And so that dictates how much credit you'll get for it. But some is better than none, and a lot is better than some, you know, in all cases. Yeah. All right, for those of you that are working on something interesting and you're approaching launching the product, or maybe you've recently launched and you're not already a part of our community, Kelsey, raise your hand if you would. She's one of our venture associates. We'd love to talk to you about our startup accelerator because you might be perfect for us to help. We do info sessions every Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock.
Every Tuesday at 3.
Tuesday at 3 here. You can find it on the Capital Factory website. Sign up. Come visit with Kelsey or one of her counterpart venture associates. We'll tell you about the startup accelerator, and maybe we can help you get funded and help you get off to the races. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. First, I wrote the first review as #1 red article on our website. So my chocolate innovation search for safe. In a nutshell, it's slightly more family-friendly maturity date, so it stays open forever, and it doesn't work interest. It's not considered yet, but it is purpose. The only challenge, the main challenge we have is less than your heritage to help save. Whereas 3 years ago, I would see it 1 out of 200 times. Now I might see it 1 out of 40 or 50. So we do see it like active investors. They've known about it, but they never invested on something. I don't know about the safe thing. It's more they're less educated on it. There's nothing wrong with it. Capital Factory is a fund. We've invested on some safes, and so they're getting gradually more familiar.
So it's not necessarily a bad idea.
No. That'd be the issue. And then check out that article. I kind of break down the key differences. What you want to do is tell investors, it's basically the same as a convertible note, it's just a little bit more simple. Now, if they do a search on reviewing safe or safe compared to convertible note, I come up #1 on Google when they type that, and they're going to read my article and see it's slightly more founder friendly. But give it a try.
Thanks.
Good luck. Hi. Hey, how are you? Really good. Is your company incorporated? I don't think
And everyone else. Sorry.
So investors
Sorry. No, we're good.
because that's what the acquirer wants to acquire, right? So if you have a German company, the challenge is we don't know German law, we don't know what's allowed, all that kind of stuff. What's next? Yeah, I think, mainly, like, if you think you're going to, that might create some problem, the opposite problem, is German investors might not want to invest in American companies. Then it pretty much needs to be an American company. And later you can set up a subsidiary in Germany, like they're going to move back, but you've got a team, it's engine here, so after a year or two, you're going to move back. That's not all, but you can do that. All right, good luck. See you later. It's really just talk to me. If you'll just remind me, like if you just remind me.